Good evening, and welcome to Hello, It's Us. Hello, It's Us is dedicated to educating the general public about issues that are important to individuals with disabilities, and we believe very strongly that as you watch this, you'll realize that those same issues are important to people in general. Hello, It's Us is a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, our friends at Uptown Bill's Coffee House, and our other friends here at Public Access Television. We're very grateful for all the support that we get. My name is Mike Hoenig, and I serve as one of the co-hosts for Hello, It's Us.
Hello, I'm Keith Ruff, the other co-host. Welcome to the show.
And Keith, I understand you're writing a book.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
It's almost finished.
And I try to keep myself, well, they actually keep me quite busy over at the Center for Disabilities and Development as a program coordinator. So between us, I think we're keeping busy, but never too busy to do a show like this. And we're especially grateful tonight to have a legislative panel. For those of you who may not keep up with such things, the 2016 General Assembly has ended. As always, it was a very lively, interesting session. And we have 4 Johnson County, and in some cases surrounding areas, legislators who have been gracious enough to give us some of their time this evening. This is the first of a 2-part series, so hopefully you'll be able to catch their comments both this evening and a week from tonight when we will continue the show. So welcome, everyone. We'd like to go ahead and have our panel introduce themselves, and Senator Bolkcom, how about, would you go ahead and lead us off here?
Thanks, Mike and Keith, for hosting tonight and having us on. I'm Joe Bolkcom. I'm a member of the Iowa Senate. I represent Senate District 43, which is includes the city of Iowa City, University Heights, and Hills.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for being here.
No problem.
Senator Dvorsky?
I'm a State Senator Bob Dvorsky from Coralville, and I represent Senate District 37, which is kind of a unique district. I have 3 precincts in the western part of Iowa City, all of Coralville and Solon in that area in northeastern Johnson County, all of the county of Cedar, and Wilton, which is in Muscatine County.
It's a large area. And thank you very much for being here. Senator Kinney?
Hi, I'm Kevin Kinney. I represent Senate District 39. I have western and southern Johnson County, all but 3 townships in Washington County, and all of Keokuk County.
All right, we're close to my old home stomping grounds there. And Representative Jacoby, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Mike. And Keith, I'm looking forward to reading your book. So is there a target date for that to be out?
Oh, hopefully at the end of the year.
Oh, golly, closing in.
Yeah.
Again, looking forward to reading it.
Yes.
I'm Dave Jacoby. I serve House District 74, which includes Coralville, Western Iowa City, and Penn Township. I happen to serve on the Ways and Means Committee, Commerce, and Transportation.
Excellent. Well, lots of areas to cover and lots of work. We're very excited. Some of you may have tuned into our pre-session show and talked a little bit about what some of the issues were at that time. Some of those are still obviously very much on our minds, and some other issues have cropped up. What we thought we would do is just to start the process out and ask each of you to just give us some overall reflections, impressions of the session, some of the things that you felt were good, positive things, some things that still, that we're, going to be looking at continuing to work on in the future, and then just some of the issues that are important. So would anyone like to just jump in there? We want to keep this informal. So.
Yes. Just jump in.
Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off. We had, I think, a decent session. It was kind of a hard session in some ways. Our financial picture is pretty tight, but we did, on a positive note, we ended with about, we have to balance the budget here every year in Iowa. We did that, and I think we did it as well as we could in funding education, our education priorities, although we would have liked to do more in that area. A lot of time this session was spent on trying to minimize the negative impact of the Medicaid privatization, Governor Branstad's unilateral decision to take more than $4 million in healthcare spending and hand it over to 3 Wall Street companies. So we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we have sufficient oversight over that. These companies will share about $500 million a year to administer the program. We've heard from a lot of providers and consumers through the session and continue to do. It started effective April 1st. So that was a big issue that we can talk about tonight. You know, there were a host of other issues, but in general, I think we kind of just got in there, did the budget as best we could with limited resources, and adjourned at the end of April. And it's good to be home and have the session behind us.
Yeah, after last year, I think
Yeah.
set a record, didn't we? Close to,
We went into
Wow.
early June,
Yeah.
I guess, last year.
well, thank you. Thanks for that.
Well, the Medicaid was certainly challenging. What was most challenging for me is hearing from individuals and families in the Johnson County area. It was at least 1 or 2 families per week, and trying to wade through the system and determine eligibility, and actually be able to tie into decent services. One of the frustrating things for me was actually a household. It was 2 parents of an adult son with disabilities, and the 2 parents happened to be retired medical doctors, and they could not wade through the system. They were fighting with Des Moines, with DHS, with the liaisons, everyone up and down the line to try to get answers for their son. And as she told me on the phone, she goes, I'm no better or worse than anyone else, but we've been involved in medicine and healthcare all our lives. And we are frustrated with the system and could not wade through the paperwork and the phone calls. So that's part of the frustration that I think all of us dealt with throughout the session, was individuals and families that had those challenges, and they still have the challenges with DHS in determining eligibility and what the future holds for them in terms of their health care.
Dave, is there any particular reason why it's so difficult?
Well, in my opinion, I think one of the most difficult first steps is the fact that DHS pulled out their local people that can talk to someone. In other words, you can't just drop into the office. You can have an appointment, but if you want to talk to a supervisor or get to that second step, you have to make phone calls to Powesheik County or maybe Lynn County and get in a whole. In fact, I know for a fact that one of the people who work at DHS in the corridor between Lynn County and Johnson County was reprimanded because she was helping people directly instead of referring them to a helpline that there was rarely a person answering the phone directly, and it was taking some time to get back. So it's frustrating, and then a lot of the notices that came from DHS were kind of backdated. In other words, you have 30 days to file an appeal or to refile your application, but those dates said, and by the way, tomorrow is your due date.
Wow.
So there's a lot of frustration in the system, and obviously the rollout to privatize Medicaid was very poorly planned. In fact, I would argue it wasn't planned at all. It was kind of a push down from the governor to say, this is what you're going to do, and then let the chips fall where they may.
One of the things that I'd be interested in, actually, let's, because we could probably, and may, spend the majority of the rest of the time on managed care, but I did want to give a chance to Senator Kinney and Senator Dvorsky for any just kind of overall reflections and comments before we dive into some of these issues. Either of you have any additional things you'd like to share?
Well, it was a very interesting session. I'm just learning. This is my second year in the Senate. I do not sit on the Health and Human Services. I sit on Judiciary. I was able to run a number of different bills this year that were passed and signed into law. One of those being the human trafficking bill, setting an office up within the Department of Public Safety to combat human trafficking. I was able to get that funded by the help of the other legislators here. in putting staff in that office. And then a Narcan bill or naloxone bill. Senator Dvorsky ran that for me on the floor because it came through, I believe, Health and Human Services, where it provides law enforcement officers, first responders, and people of family members that can obtain a prescription to be able to have naloxone. It's the antidote for a morphine overdose.
Oh,
So
and that was something that was not accessible previously to?
it was not accessible to law enforcement, the general public through a prescription and or first responders.
Oh.
Paramedics and so forth could carry it, but it opened it up with all the heroin overdose deaths and or morphine overdose deaths that we've been having. I had seen a need. I'd worked with Senator Brace from Muscatine, and he'd been working on this issue, and we wound up working together, and were able to get this passed into law. So it's out there, so law enforcement and first responders can use it to try to save people's lives.
That's cool. It sounds like two very important safety-related bills that were much needed. So, great, Senator Dvorsky.
Yes, thank you. Senator Bob Dvorsky from Coralville. I serve on Health and Human Services Appropriations Subcommittee with Senator Bolkcom. Serve on Rules Administration, Education, State Government, and I'm chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So the bulk of my time is spent working with people on the Appropriations Committee and the appropriation bills. One of the things that I think people need to keep into context, and we always have to explain this to people, because if you didn't understand the context, I don't think you understand exactly the product that comes out of the session. We are divided control. The Democrats are control of the Iowa Senate barely, 26-24. In the Iowa House, the Republicans are control, 57 to 43, a little bit more margin there. And the governors are Republican. So 2 out of 3 entities are controlled by the Republicans, and the Democrats control 1 entity. So that means you have to work together with, in our case, the House Republicans, because they're the majority party, to try and get something done. And to get anything done, you have to come up with something called the Rule of 78. That means you have to have at least 26 votes in the Iowa Senate to pass something, 51 votes in the Iowa House, and have the governor sign it. So nothing really happens unless you have that number. And so everything is sort of set up to deal with that if you want anything done. Now, obviously, we've stopped a lot of things in the Iowa Senate we didn't think were very good that were sent over by the Iowa House, not by Representative Jacoby, but by the House Republicans. And they've stopped a lot of what we would consider great bills over to the Iowa House, and they didn't go anywhere. So that's the context we're in. I know a lot of times people see these shows and they come up to you and say, well, why didn't you do this, or that? You know, why couldn't you just do that? Well, because we don't have the numbers. I mean, that's the whole situation. So we actually have to sit down and work and get things done. And my particular job is one where we actually have to do that. We actually have to do a budget, and one that actually balances. That's in the Constitution. So we have to get that done, regardless of what else gets done. So a lot of the time was spent on that. Unfortunately, we went into the session with a really tough budget to start with. And then in March, the REC, the Revenue Estimating Conference, came back and said, you know, the revenues aren't coming in at a high enough rate. We're going to make you cut this $56 million. So we had to go in and on an already tight budget and cut $56 million. So that really made everything even more tighter in the whole situation. But early on during the session, we did get done finally an allowable growth bill for K through 12 funding. Wasn't at the level anyone wanted, I don't think, 2.25%, but we hadn't done that for what, 18 months, maybe? And finally got it done, and that will at least allow the schools to move forward. Now, it wasn't enough, but once again, it's divided control. So that was one of the first big things we did, and then everything else from there sort of moved forward when we got the number on what we had on the budget and moved through some of these other issues. So that's sort of the overall context of the session. And I think considering the divided control, we actually did have a decent session.
Okay.
Senator Dvorsky, when you said major cuts, what areas do you think, or no, that really took major cuts that are very important to Iowans as a whole?
Well, unfortunately, usually when we have to make cuts, we make cuts in areas that there's a lot of money spent. You know, it's kind of like, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. So we actually had to make cuts, and unfortunately, Health and Human Services, that's the largest budget. And then if you include all the education funding, that would be the largest budget, but that's separately done. Some is in the Education Appropriations Bill and some is in standings. So those two areas are the ones that there is a lot of funding done by the state, and we had to make sort of cuts that were proportional there. But we try and consider all the programs and everything, and our caucus certainly is interested in Health and Human Services and education. So.
And I think part of the wrestling match, though, you have with the budget is the fact, and I don't believe anyone here with you today at today's forum voted for it, as the commercial property tax relief.
Right.
Because the commercial property tax relief now is ramped up to where we're investing $316 million a year to backfill local governments. And so the money that we're using, taking out of the state revenue picture, is actually all of our income tax that we pay and our sales tax that we pay. Income tax, personal income tax being the number one revenue stream for the state budget, and the second being sales tax. And contrary to what some people think, corporate income tax is a distant third. So basically what we're doing is using our income tax to backfill that commercial property tax reduction. It's kind of a goofy way to reduce commercial property taxes, which in my opinion should be reduced, paying it 100%, but we could have done it a number of different ways with a slower 1% per year, or somehow that cities and counties and schools wouldn't be so affected from the first if we didn't backfill it. But anytime you use a tax to backfill a tax, I think generally most people would agree that that's kind of a bad idea. But it was a tough budget, or is a tough budget year, but that takes, as I mentioned, over $300 million off the table before you even start day one of session.
Can you talk a little bit about, excuse me, can you talk a little bit about, and when I say you, I mean anyone that wants to jump in on this. We had a chance to visit about this a little bit prior to the start of the show, in terms of how this reduction and the backfilling, how that affects the counties in terms of providing services to folks with mental health and developmental disabilities.
Well, the totality of the commercial property tax is supposed to be backfilled to the counties and to the cities, and that promise, or the legislation is lasting for 10 years, if I remember correctly. It was a 10-year commitment. What we did not backfill, what we are not making whole to cities and counties, and it's especially egregious to us in Johnson County, is the property tax reduction for apartments, for multi-residential dwellings, rental units. So the cities and the counties will see a reduction in their budget. And anytime the county sees a reduction in their budget with their own built-ins, it makes it very difficult to adequately fund the needs of the people in the county.
Well, and especially considering those budgets have not been able to be increased for the mental health and developmental disabilities for so many years as it is. So that's just another challenge that we're going to have to face, I guess.
Well, as you know, over the last 5 years or so, we've gone from a 99 county system to a regional system to provide mental health services and disability services to adults in Iowa. And the transition's gone really well. We've now have, I believe, about 15 different regions. And in most cases, we've seen actually over the last 2 years, some 70 plus counties actually make slight reductions in their levy ask for mental health services. But we have about 8 counties that need some more capacity. And there was legislation this session to basically allow counties to move up if they need to. And we passed a bill in committee in the Senate, but didn't really get a good signal from the House Republicans. There wasn't much interest in taking up a property tax bill this session. And it's really just focused in this very narrow area about how we fund mental health services. One of the reasons why counties have gotten a little bit, they've been able to lower their levies is because of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. We have a whole bunch of adults in Iowa, nearly 150,000 adults now with health insurance, and they're able to get mental health services through their insurance through the Obamacare. And previously they were paid for by county taxpayers. So we've freed up, if you will, some of the county tax dollar that formerly took care of folks that now have insurance. So that's really the good news of that. To stabilize this new regional system, we really do need to tackle this property tax issue around the mental health levy, and hopefully next year. In the Senate, actually, there's a lot of bipartisan support for it. It came out of committee with a strong bipartisan vote. And it's really the final piece, I think, to stabilize our new regional county mental health system.
I'm really glad to hear that that high percentage of counties that actually had to reduce their ask. I mean, that's very. I will admit to having some real trepidation about changing this. I mean, I knew that the current system as it was had so many flaws, but there were a lot of people that were just as concerned about regionalization. So that's very, very encouraging to hear that counties and areas have cooperated.
Yeah. Well, they've been under, since 1997, county taxpayers around the state put about $120 million into the mental health system. Today it's about $108 million. It could never go more than $120 million approximately. And I think it's thrown a lot of people, because there's been talk over the years about giving counties more authority, because it has always been frozen since 1997. That's nearly 20 years ago. Same amount of dollars for 20 years. And to see 70-plus counties actually lower their tax asking, I think got a lot of people's attention, that local elected officials will make good decisions on these issues. And for years, the counties have tried to raise that levy, and everybody at the legislature says, well, if we give supervisors more authority, by God, they're going to raise taxes. And here we go and see that 70-plus counties have actually lowered them. So I think it bodes well for making a change to help the 8 or so counties that really need a slight increase to make themselves a good regional partner.
This question is for anyone there. Joe, you just mentioned the goodness of Obamacare. Has the state any foresight if Obamacare is cut in the next election? What are they going to do with those 150,000 people that rely on it?
Well, it's not going to be a good situation. I mean, one of the things Obamacare has done, for example, for our hospitals are providing about $400 million in charity care a year to people that show up at the emergency room or are sick, and hospitals have some duty to take care of people. And that's a huge cost to them. Well, we've seen that their charity care, they still have some, but it's plummeted because we have federal help paying initially 90% of the cost. So it's actually been a really good thing for the state. Everybody at the end of the day is at some point going to need some health care, and you're generally healthier if you get it. So it's been a good thing, and hopefully, we got elections this fall, and the Republicans have voted, 180,000 times to repeal Obamacare. It'd be a terrible thing for that to happen at this point.
I think, and maybe I'm just being Pollyannish or idealistic or whatever, but I would hope that one of the things that's discussed during this presidential campaign is the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. I mean, the Republicans keep saying we got to get rid of this, and then they have no plans to how you're going to change it. So I would be helpful to find out from Donald Trump, for example, what is his plan if he wants to get rid of it. And how does that affect everybody? And I think now that it's going to be almost impossible to do that. For example, we're serving 150,000 people in Iowa. The larger states, you serve, millions of people. So I think, a discussion of that would be helpful and actually lay all the facts out, because most of this is shrouded in a lot of political rhetoric and you don't really get the information or answers. So that would be helpful.
And, of those 150,000 people, 80% of those folks are working full-time jobs. I mean,
Right.
these are people that work in the economy. They're our neighbors. They do service jobs. We can't get any support to raise the minimum wage from Republicans in Iowa. The Senate passed a good bill last year. They said no. So taxpayers are stuck with the bill when employers don't pay for the cost of health care for their employees. And Obamacare is part of the solution to that. But people on Obamacare basically are working and tax-paying citizens trying to make ends meet.
I think those of us that maybe, again, we're a little skeptical about that. I know I have a health condition now that is it's quite costly. And just to know, to have that peace of mind, even to know that you're not going to tap out, you're not going to max out, or you're not going to be penalized because of a pre-existing condition. And I mean, I've been converted, I must say. So. We have a few minutes yet to go, and maybe we'll save managed care for part 2 here, because I think that may take a bit of time. But I wanted to go back just Senator Dvorsky and Senator Bolkcom. I know that you both mentioned the budget, and again, that's anyone can jump in here too. But I promised a colleague and friend that I would ask this question, so I will. But I'm going to make it a bit broader of a context, and that is her question specifically was, there are organizations in the state now called Aging and Disability Resource Centers, and what I understand is that they were funded or were allocated $1 million during this legislative session, whereas some of the other groups, for instance, her particular interest is Centers for Independent Living, but I'm sure there are other disability groups that have had the same situation where that funding didn't come through. Would anyone like to talk a little bit about, just in terms of maybe even more in general, how it happens that certain organizations like an ADRC, for instance, would have the clout or the success in a year when we had so much money coming off the table that they're able to get funded?
Well, I think we actually we fought pretty hard throughout the negotiations to get money for the ADRCs and the lifelong links issue. The $1 million you note, I mean, that was a Democratic priority to continue to fund that. We were worried that there were a whole bunch of services would immediately go away without that $1 million appropriation. I think the request was actually for more, and that's money that goes to our area agencies on aging. That kind of network, and they're relatively organized, right? And so as we think of the independent living centers, it's squeaky wheel gets the grease at the legislature.
Absolutely.
And folks did come and lobby on that, but just given the lot of really hard choices that got made in these budgets, there just wasn't enough to cover everybody that needed it. So I think it's just continuing to be vocal and advocate with legislators across the state. I know that we don't have centers everywhere, but people need to just continue to make the case for why these services are important and why they ought to be adequately funded.
I think it would be helpful if Dawn and all those proponents would not give up, and since they started this last year, making a good effort to try and get, I think we were asking for 300,000, something like that. Might have been a little bit more. And keep working on that, because I think centers for independent living aren't quite well understood by the general populace in the legislature. They're still going to need more education so people understand that. I mean, their first funding, state funding, I got for them a couple of years ago, and then unfortunately it's been sort of cut back since then. But they do understand their role now especially under this MCOs, would be more important than ever. And I think that the more advocacy we have, the better.
Well, I want to thank you very much for the response and for all of your participation. It's been a great, quick half hour, as I knew it would be. Thanks to each of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us, and we'll look forward to more wisdom in the week to come. Thank you for watching, and good night.